everybody, welcome to Youth Bombs. I'm Tim,
I'm Craig.
and we are the voice of young conservatives here in Alachua County. And of course, I'm not young at all. I'm actually the chairman of the Alachua County Republican Party, Tim Martin. But I am here with Craig Anderson. He is our representative from the next generation, I suppose. Craig, great to have you here today. Glad we were able to spend a little time and talk a little bit. So we're going to talk about guns today, and I was just really kind of curious about what your age group really kind of thinks about guns. It's commonly, sort of one of the bellwethers for conservatives, the Republican Party, and all that stuff. But before we got on air, you were telling me a little bit about how it's not necessarily as big a deal among young people. So I want you to kind of talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, it's not necessarily on the forefront of young people's minds. I think that there are a lot of hobbyists who enjoy using them and exercising their Second Amendment rights, but a lot of fellow conservatives I know haven't necessarily touched a gun more than once, and I think that's fairly common, at least in Massachusetts, where I'm from, where they make it way too hard to buy a gun.
And do you think it's more of a family sort of heritage thing? Because I honestly don't know a whole lot of young people who just sort of pick up guns and just start using them or start target shooting or anything like that. Do you think it's one of those things that just kind of gets passed along in generation to generation?
I think it makes it more likely that you're going to use it if your parents do. I think we adopt some of our parents' religious beliefs or political beliefs in many cases.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that can be adopted by the youth.
I gotcha. So do your friends or just kind of people in your circle sort of, do they ever talk about that? Talk about guns specifically or legislation that's coming up or anything like that? What do you have to say to people about that?
Yeah, one of my friends does. He's an avid enthusiast. He likes to go to the range to do target practice. He's a good shot, and he has fun with it. He's definitely frustrated by the strict gun laws in Massachusetts, and hopefully that can change. I do have another friend in New Hampshire. Part of the reason he moved to New Hampshire was for the better gun laws and just looking for more freedom.
Oh, sure, definitely. What do you think about the whole, some of the states really, and I think Florida may have actually just changed this, the past session, which actually closed, I think, March 9th, where they lowered the age from 21 back to 18, which it was moved up to 21, if memory serves me, after the Parkland incident, where the guy went in and shot up the school just a few years ago, and the legislature just kind of immediately changed a few things, but they seem to kind of walk that back this last session. Do you have kind of any feeling or opinion about that? Because a lot of times it was tied into, hey, military service at 18, you can go defend your country, but you can't go buy a gun, just in general. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you should absolutely be able to buy a gun at 18. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to. You can vote, you can serve in the military. You should absolutely be able to buy a gun and exercise your Second Amendment rights. You are an adult, so I think that's perfectly valid.
Gotcha. There's a lot of, discussion, debate around this topic, and it's pretty straight down political lines. And why do you think that has sort of developed over time? What do you think makes it such a hotbed issue between the two parties?
Increasing political polarization in the country and the radical left increasingly pushing against Second Amendment rights and trying to make it into a controversial issue where you have, say, a quarter of the Democrat Party really hating them avidly, want to ban them completely, and they're trying to make them toxic. So now it's a question of, okay, well, how can those Democrats get the far left support that they need to win some elections?
And what do you think or what do you think the genesis of that? Where did that sort of detesting nature of guns come from by people on the left? Why do you think that they just straight up want to ban them altogether?
I think they look to other countries. They think that their gun bans have been successful, but they often don't know that guns are used 1 to 2 million times per year for self-defense purposes in the United States. So they may be looking to emulate that model in foreign countries.
Do people your age ever talk about why that is in the Constitution to begin with? Because you're trying to, things like Bill of Rights, or I'm sorry, free speech, freedom of assembly, the ability to, you got to have a warrant to come into my house and do those sorts of things. It doesn't necessarily line up with those more kind of abstract rights, I guess. I mean, it's sort of all these kind of abstract rights, God-given, and then all of a sudden here, the second one down is about guns. Why, or I'm sorry, people your age, what do they think of when they talk about it being actually in the Constitution, that we have that, and how it compares to some of the other rights that were outlined in the Constitution?
Yeah, not as many of them focus on it like they should. I think that we need to be aware of our rights and the importance of self-defense, but there's not enough focus on it, and I think that's something that could increase as there's more education surrounding it, and perhaps we can push to see more people understand why self-defense is so critical for a free and fair society.
Well, I've come across a lot of law enforcement. We in the city of Newberry actually contract with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office for our police protection, but I've actually said on the dais in Newberry, no disrespect to law enforcement, but we are supposed to be our own first responders, because as the saying goes, when the police, and when you need a police person there, or policeman or policewoman, when seconds count, they're minutes away. Have you ever heard that phrase before?
I have, and that's absolutely true. You need to be able to protect yourself in such situations where you could lose your life if the police are minutes away and you only have seconds left.
Right. I remember very clearly and very specifically, if you are a concealed carry permit holder and you're actually carrying, you actually take on the onus of not only just your person and protecting your person, but you're also sort of duty bound to protect people around you as well. I've seen different videos online about, somebody kind of comes in and robs a store, is a concealed carry holder in the store that defends themselves and the clerks, and that's a lot of responsibility for somebody to take on as a concealed carry holder, but I think it's one of those responsibilities that people who are carriers, they sort of want, and not from a mean, malicious standpoint, but they kind of recognize the importance of serving in that role when the police aren't around. They obviously can't be everywhere all the time. It would cost us a fortune to have that many police, and who wants to live in a police state to begin with, right?
Right, exactly.
Sure. So I think it's super important, but I actually think let's say the cliche is it was to fend off a tyrannical government, and I think there's an aspect to that. Obviously, the founding fathers had just fought a war. They're just coming out of that whole crisis situation with Britain when they started writing the Constitution a few years later, and. But my ex-boss, the former CEO, Arthur Thompson, he wrote a book, and it was about property rights. And in that book, he talks about how property rights actually don't just start as your physical land, your home, your car, your things like that, but it actually starts in your mind. And you have the right of your mind and your own thoughts, and you have ownership of those thoughts. But he kind of dovetails in that property rights are in the essence, really what this country is about. So many of the other countries you are, you're allowed on the land, sharecropping, and all those sorts of things. England had a different system at the time, where everything was owned by the king. You were just kind of allowed to be there and working. So property rights were very, very unique, and the right to defend those against maybe all enemies, foreign and domestic, was really kind of baked into that cake. Had you ever really kind of thought about it that way by any chance?
Yeah, and I think if we were in the situation of, say, governance like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, then it's absolutely vital that the citizens are able to stop tyranny. So I think it's critical that it be understood in that sense, because historically, as you mentioned, they just did fight off the tyrannical British government and need to be able to protect themselves from tyranny.
Right. Well, it's funny you mention a couple of those countries or a couple of those people, because I got something I wanted to show you, and I'll show it to you. I'll get your opinion, and I'll also show it to the audience too as well. And you can read it out loud if you want.
The experts agree: Hitler, Castro, Gaddafi, Stalin. Gun control works.
So I'll show this kind of to the audience. Hopefully the reflection isn't too bad. But yeah, it says the experts agree gun control works. And it's a picture of Hitler and Castro, Gaddafi, and Stalin. So how does that first hit you when you see that and read that?
It's absolutely true. You've got the worst people in society, the worst people who have ever lived, advocating to take away your right to self-defense because they want to harm you. And when you're unarmed, they can do whatever they want to you.
One person who's not on there is Mao Zedong, who took over China. And certainly both Stalin and he killed more people in history than anybody else at all. But it's sort of funny when you line up the left or the liberals and the quote-unquote progressives with this whole angle of gun control. And I think there's a very valid argument that you can't take control of people who are armed very easily. So getting gun control implemented and taking away the guns allows for these other things to sort of become ushered in over time. I don't ever see sort of the left kind of holding themselves up in a mirror with that. And why? Because I think at the end of the day, they just want to control everything. And it's just kind of a means to an end. But why do you think they never really ever seem to even process that or entertain that sort of connection?
They're not looking at history. They think that they can just look at these sort of immediate or future goals without learning from what the past was like and how horrific these atrocities were.
Or maybe they are.
That's true. I think there's a lot of people on the left who genuinely think like no guns will make a safer society.
Absolutely, they do. I think.
And they're wrong. They're flat wrong. But they think that they just ignore Hitler and Stalin and all these other terrible people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always sort of, well, that part of it won't happen. We'll just get rid of the guns, and that's kind of where it'll stop. But you obviously hear all the arguments about, well, there's plenty of people that get killed from knives and from fists and from drunk drivers and different things like that. And you hear the kind of the analogies that always play out as well. We don't take cars away from the drunk driver who's killed somebody. And it's sort of equated to, in fact, I think I was quoted to something similar in the Gainesville Sun not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago. But that was sort of my analogy, and it got twisted around because that analogy is true, and they don't want that analogy to really be entertained by anybody because it makes a perfect scenario. We don't do those kinds of things. But somehow, it's as if guns are just held up to this special lamp, or just some sort of equivalent, moral equivalent of, yeah, no guns, no safe, or full implemented safety, like you're talking about. But there's no way that really ever comes to pass. And I mean, you look at all the different places where you have shooters go into places. What's one of the biggest ones?
As far as
Where a shooter goes in and kills people.
a school.
A school, right? Exactly. So, you're starting to see legislation bubbling up with teachers being able to carry and different things like that. How do you feel about that?
It makes sense. You should at least have one security guard or a teacher who's armed, and perhaps we don't know who that teacher is,
Right.
for the safety of the classrooms in
Yeah.
terms of they could be anywhere, so a shooter's not gonna want to mess with them.
Right.
But
Element of surprise, right?
exactly.
Mhm.
And just as a shooter wouldn't go into a building or
A police station.
a police station or a home with armed people,
Right.
they're not going to do that to a school with someone armed inside. So it makes sense that you're able to protect children that way by having an armed person
For
in
sure.
there.
Have you noticed over the last several years, and this kind of got on my radar maybe a year and a half ago, if somebody, maybe in the incident 2 people die, that's a mass shooting. It's almost as if there's a shooting out in public, it is referred to as mass shooting, whether there's 2 people that are killed or 20 people that are killed. But that label gets painted on every incident like that, and I feel like that is, and you probably agree, that just is sort of kind of poisoning the well intentionally and trying to, I think you said earlier, it's just kind of trying to hype it up almost and make it more of a big deal and trying to push it into the common language or something like that, right?
Yeah, they want to make the numbers look as bad as possible, and people don't necessarily see the context. They just see the number, and they don't have time to dig into it and see the truth.
Yeah, and I mean, you're a smart guy. You pay attention to a lot of news and statistics and things like that. Do you, off the top of your head, know any kind of statistics about countries? I think Britain doesn't allow guns, but they still have murders from knives and things like that. Where, on the contrary, in Switzerland, is it not required to have a firearm in Switzerland? And how that compares to how many murders, I guess, are over there?
Right. I'm not sure if it's required or not, but they do have high gun ownership with low crime.
Mm-hmm.
And additionally, I believe there's a town in the United States where everyone owns a weapon. And
I think it's in Georgia.
Yeah, and they have the lowest crime rate.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show that you're able to protect your community that way.
Sure. Well, everyone sort of becomes a police person or a police officer. There was there was another angle that I was trying to think of. Maybe I'll remember. We'll come back to it. But there hasn't been any legislation that you're aware of that has gone for gun restrictions that has been successful. Do you know of any?
Not
I guess statistically.
No, statistically in terms of lowering crime, no.
Mhm.
No, absolutely not.
What do you think it would do in a place like Chicago?
Oh, it would make it worse because the criminals, and Illinois has strict gun control, the criminals will still be armed, there will still be gang violence. That won't stop. The criminals won't say, oh, well, it's illegal, so I guess I can't have a gun now. They're unfortunately going to still be shooting innocent people and wreaking havoc across Chicago.
I remember what I was going to ask you about. There's sort of been a theme that's come out of, or just kind of before COVID, about sort of this idea of almost every military person is sort of trying to get forced into, and maybe you're not even aware of this, they're trying to get forced into some kind of counseling for PTSD. They get labeled with PTSD and are sort of put in this special class of, well, they're a danger risk. They can't have a gun. And I was watching a program the other night with my wife, and every commercial break was a drug commercial. And I feel like there is some undertone where if we can get as much drugs pushed into people and we can get them to as many doctors as possible, it's sort of a backdoor to a gun control element. Because, you know, if you are a doctor in the AMA, which is completely corrupt, they'll happily mark medical records that this person is, you know, taking this drug. There's an element of, you know, increased risk of suicides and things like that. Had you heard anything about that? Do you have any opinion about that? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense?
I've heard of some of that in terms of people being labeled under a certain category and being deemed too dangerous to own a firearm.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily make sense to restrict someone's fundamental right to self-defense
Mm-hmm.
based on the subjective analysis of an individual.
I think subjective is a very key element of that. It's interesting that you kind of brought that up. Do you know why you thought subjective?
Because the left they'll label their opponents anything, so why wouldn't they do it to people they don't want to own firearms? We see how they persecute their opponents.
What do you think about red flag laws?
It's a negative for sure, because you've got no proof, just one person against another, one voice, he said, she said, and that's not right in terms of being able to take away someone's right to self-defense. It's just a he said, she said. It's not fair.
Right. I think of it in terms of children, where I've come across in my life so many couples who sort of pit the children against each other, or they use the children to pit each other against one another. You have a wife who is calling on her ex-husband and vice versa, and they use the Department of Children and Family as a weapon, right? I've seen it in my own family. I've seen it external of my family, where literally the Department of Children and Family is used as a weapon to, you know, just bicker back and forth with each other. And I feel like the red flag laws can be abused the same way, and you don't end up using the police for something constructive. You end up bogging them down in a lot of administrative work. Like you said, it's just, you know, it's kind of used to go after one another. But I can also see it for, and I'm sure there's incidents out here if we looked it up, about even a neighbor who has a disgruntled neighbor, and they have a dispute between them, is what I meant to say, a dispute between neighbors, where you can call on, you can almost report anything on somebody, right?
Right, absolutely.
And there's another concept, and by the way, I think Senator Rubio is actually very in favor of red flag laws, which is kind of disappointing. But a new thing has been coming around that I've seen in the news, and I got a news release from Senator Rick Scott's office, and the term, I believe, is swatting. So you have somebody who is basically calling in a false accusation of maybe some kind of an emergency or some kind of troubled situation into 911. Maybe it's from a burner phone or something like that, and you have this, rush of law enforcement to an area, and it just kind of is not only, a nuisance 10x, but you really potentially set up a really kind of scary situation, especially if the person is not able to recognize that it's the police. They think there's just, especially an elected official, if they're of any high consequence or anything like that, they're going to be on a little bit heightened security, right? So if you don't, maybe it's plainclothes officers that end up reporting to the scene, they're going to have a little bit of sense of urgency if it is an elected official. But this is sort of starting to be actually used as a weapon, and I'm afraid, very afraid, that it could really devolve into somebody getting killed, unnecessarily.
It has. I've heard of a case where that happened.
Wow, what's that?
I believe it was Kansas, and it was a disgruntled individual against another who did this. The SWAT team came in and they killed this innocent individual. So very
Wow.
tragic, and people who do this are intentionally diverting emergency services away from people who need them, causing a false distraction and wasting resources, and should be harshly prosecuted.
Have you heard about anybody who's been prosecuted for that?
Vaguely, but not in depth. I know that they are able to track down these individuals eventually, but it does take time because they work to conceal their identity.
Well, and I'm sure there's an element that they want to brag, to their buddies that they did this or they did that. So like you're saying, it probably does eventually get around back to the police. Anything else on the topic that you thought the viewers might be interested in or anything like that?
Just to consider the importance of our fundamental rights,
Mhm.
and that we should never take them for granted because it's so important.
No, I gotcha. Good closing there. Well, kind of dovetailing in this topic, the Alachua County Republican Party is actually hosting a range day, so you can get trained up and that sort of thing over at Shoot TTR. It's going to be on April 13th from 9 a.m. in the morning and up to 1 p.m. in the afternoon. It includes lunch at $60. It's called the Big Red Shootout. Go to bigredshootout.com and get registered and make sure you got a slot for that. And it's in part it's actually sponsored by Brian Kramer, a Republican state attorney for the 8th Judicial District. Have you signed up already yet? Or are you going to, you think?
I will, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, we'll throw that graphic up here in the video and edit it in. But great to spend a couple minutes with you, Craig, on this topic. I think it's important. So for everybody out there, we are the Youth Bomb Show, the voice of young conservatives in Alachua County. I'm Tim Martin, chairman of the Alachua County Republicans, and I'm here with Craig Anderson. So we appreciate you. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the show, and share it out to your friends so we can kind of build our audience. You know how it goes. Thanks a lot, and have a great afternoon.